We were given interim sanctioning authority to remove appraisers or appraisal management companies from the registry for up to 90 days. And that's pending state action. So nobody gets concerned that the subcommittee is going to get crazy and start removing appraisers or appraisal management companies, you know, on a whim. That will not happen. It would have to be, the state would have to be doing something extremely egregious in terms of not carrying out their responsibilities before the subcommittee would ever take such an action. But it is an additional authority that we have. Right now, or since the passage of Title 11 back in 1989, one of the big flaws in our ability to regulate the states has been the fact that we've only had one sanctioning weapon to use if states don't comply. And that one sanctioning weapon is called non-recognition of the state. In a nutshell, if the subcommittee ever took that action, which it hasn't, it's been threatened a number of times, but if the subcommittee were ever to de-recognize or non-recognize a state program, effectively all the appraisers in that state lose their license or certification, and all mortgage lending, all federally related transactions cease in that state. So the only thing we've had is a financial nuclear bomb. Now we've got some other interim sanctions that are provided to us in advance of taking such a draconian thing. An appraisal complaint hotline. The subcommittee was tasked with establishing, first determining by January of 2011 whether a hotline that meets the definition that it provided in Dodd-Frank. By January of 2011, we had to determine whether a hotline existed that met that definition. The subcommittee determined that there was not a hotline that met that definition. So we've been in the process of putting that hotline together. And I know that there is questions out there about where's the hotline, is it ever going to be stood up? Yes, it definitely is going to be stood up. What people don't really understand is how difficult something like this is when you have 7 large federal government agencies who have to work together to be able to handle these complaints. The subcommittee's role, frankly, is the easier piece of it. Our role and our authority, which is limited to this, is to simply refer the complaints to the appropriate federal and state agencies to carry out the investigation of the complaint. So we are in the process of working with the agencies. They are working together to make sure that they have everything in place that once these complaints do start coming in, that they're able to investigate them and adjudicate them properly. The subcommittee was also given the authority to write regulations. Not every government agency, in fact most government agencies, do not have rulemaking authority, or which simply means the authority to write regulations. The authority that was given to the subcommittee to write regulations is limited to temporary practice, the National Registry, information sharing, and enforcement. So while it's limited, those are 4 pretty big areas that the subcommittee deals with. Prior to writing any regulations, the subcommittee is required to establish an advisory committee. And this is to be made up of appraisers, lenders, consumer advocates, real estate agents, government agencies, and others. But Dodd-Frank is very specific that it has to include at least these folks. So when and if we get to writing regulations, it's not a given that the subcommittee will write regulations. If they decide that that's necessary for a certain topic, they certainly are willing and able to do so. But in advance of that, we will convene an advisory committee or committees, and we would hope that folks just like you would be part of that. We're also given an additional new sanctioning authority, which is the authority to sanction states for insufficient funding of their appraisal programs. One of the biggest problems we find in our compliance reviews of the states is a lack of funding, therefore a lack of staffing, and a lack of resources in general. You know, we have states with 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 appraisers who have 1, 2, 3, 4 staff members. Simply not enough to handle complaints, deal with the application process, and do things efficiently. But in the past, until Dodd-Frank, we never had the authority to go after a state because they didn't have enough funding. We could, we could go after them for a lot of the results of a lack of funding, such as not being able to enforce, not being able to handle their complaints in a timely manner, or get their applications through in a timely manner. But now, if they're having those problems and it's a result of a lack of funding, we can write them up and go after them for that. In terms of new sanctioning authority, the subcommittee has the authority now to remove appraisers and AMCs for 90 days. As I mentioned, we also have the authority now to impose interim sanctions over and above the 90 days and in advance of non-recognition. Dodd-Frank's not specific on this. We haven't really started the discussion on what type of interim sanctions could be useful. The sanction that immediately comes to everybody's mind is fines, things like that, that we could issue to the state. But if you've got a state that's virtually bankrupt to begin with, if you start fining the state, is that really going to get you to where you want to be? So there'll be a lot of thought put into this before any additional sanctions are put out there. In terms of appraisal management companies, the federal regulators right now, the Federal Financial Institution, regulatory agencies, along with the CFPB and FHFA, are writing the regulations as we speak that will be promulgated to the states in January. And those regulations are going to set minimum requirements for the states in regard to requiring AMCs to register with the state, as long as they're not a subsidiary of a federally regulated institution. The states will have to set up regulations, laws and regulations that licensed or certified appraisers only are used for federally related transactions, that AMCs are complying with USPAP, or their appraisal reports that come out of AMCs are complying with USPAP, and that they are that the states are upholding federal regulations in regard to appraisal independence standards. It's important to point out that states may regulate AMCs. If a state, just like the appraisal requirements, if a state decided we're not interested in federally regulated transactions taking place in our state, then you don't have to have an appraisal law at all. Similar to that, for AMCs, if a state wasn't interested in having appraisal management companies do business in their state, they don't necessarily have to enact AMC regulation also. The ASC is also authorized to establish a national registry fee for appraisal management companies. So as part of the registration process, AMCs are being required to pay. It's just like it's very similar to appraisers. When you get your license or renew your license, you're paying a fee to the state for your license, but $40 now, it used to be $25, $40 now also comes to the appraisal subcommittee for your registry, for your national registry fee. It'll be likely be a similar process for the appraisal management companies. they'll pay their fee to the state, and then the way the Dodd-Frank is written, a lot of this is not real clear, but the appraisal management companies will be required to pay $25, that can go up to $50, per appraiser that they have contracted with to do business over the last 12 months. So figuring out how exactly, everybody's going to figure out how to determine which appraisers have been used over the last 12 months and things like that. Hasn't been done yet, but that will be a big part of getting this right.